what was the very first thing that you did when you went into work today?
Have a cup of coffee and then log into my email. Always first thing.
Did you have any pressing emails or anything?
Yeah, so basically I had another client. They wanted to increase the amount of LNG that goes on the storage barge. So basically they wanted to see if we could put more LNG on this barge or see what needs to be done. So basically maybe expanding these flasks that are holding the LNG. They wanted to run a trial to see how much more that they could put on with this certain size barge dimension already taken into place.
How far along is that project already? How close is it to completion?
We're still in the design phase, so we can still modify our design for production.
So how do you start the whole process of making changes to an existing design?
Running these calculations through Excel. Basically, we create an Excel spreadsheet where you could input the dimensions of these flasks. These flasks are the ones that would hold the LNG. You could increase the height of it. So basically, if we have the barge dimensions already fixed, and then the only thing that we can modify are these flask dimensions and like the structure that holds these flasks in place. So we have a spreadsheet where we could input numbers and then it populates other numbers. It just carries it all the way through the spreadsheet. So it makes it pretty simple and pretty easy to use so that we don't have to enter each number manually each time.
So they actually call the holding things for the LNG, they call them flasks?
Flask, or another word for them would be like a cell or flask. I just say flask, that's what they look like.
So now, if you change the dimensions of the flask in the Excel worksheet, what other numbers are changing in that worksheet?
The steel weight, the weight of the LNG itself, the amount of LNG is being held. So these flasks are held into another container. These containers would also have to be modified to fit these flasks. And these containers are fixed structure on a ship. Then we would have to modify the weight in our program where like the center of gravity of all these cells are so that you can input this into our GHS software. Once you have more LNG, bigger size flask, the center of gravity changes for the ship depending on where you put it. And then we have to figure out where the center of gravity is so that you could put this into our GHS program to run the ship stability.
So when you're making these things, what comes first? Is it the spreadsheet with all the numbers or is it the model?
We would put all this into our Excel spreadsheet first because that would actually spit out like the weight of the steel and position in certain spots of the ship. So then once we have these numbers from Excel, then we could input these numbers into our hydrostatic software program.
Can the program literally just take a whole spreadsheet of data and you just like click import or something?
So basically GHS is like a program that requires like coding. I'm not sure if you're like familiar with like Matlab or...
I'm familiar with Matlab, sure. I was never very good at it, but I'm familiar with it.
Yeah, you have to have these certain functions, these certain coding to put into GHS. There's a manual to put all these different commands into GHS. So we basically just have to pull out like the certain numbers from the math of the Excel spreadsheet, just get particular numbers to put into GHS. The GHS is a very simple program. They basically want to know the center of gravity of each structure, each component, and then the weight. As long as you have the ship already modeled, then GHS will do the rest.
Who makes those specific Matlab codes to go from an Excel worksheet and translating all those numbers into the model? Who actually makes those functions?
Myself. GHS is a software that I learned on the spot. I didn't learn this in college at all. This is more towards like naval architecture, like marine engineer. So I graduated with like a mechanical engineering degree. So I talked to a lot of naval architects. They actually use GHS quite often when they went through like maritime school and schools such like that. But I didn't have any exposure to that until I took this position. Going back to that, like using the software Rhino, which is that 3D rendering program. That's something that I also never learned in college. I also picked that up along my career.
So you actually had to go through and make those MATLAB functions?
Yeah, so one of my first tasks was to actually go through this very painful manual and watching videos online of how to use this software. And then also like asking specific questions to people around me and also looking at previous examples of how people code certain things, combining all that together. It's a headache in the beginning, but once you get more practice, it gets a little bit easier. It's impossible to know everything. There's always new tutorials that are coming out, new additions to the software, new updates. So it's constantly changing. You're always learning something new.
Can you give us an example of a MATLAB function that does something maybe specific, like what exactly it does with the numbers, and then how does it translate it into GHS?
Yeah, so when you model the ship, it asks for points in 3D, XYZ coordinate on the plane so that you're able to model this ship. So if you have these XYZ coordinates, I would have to go through like a drawing of the tank, figure out in relation to the ship, where is this tank going to be located, that I'm able to model that into GHS. So it'll be fuel oil tank. I'll just type in like FO or insert FO and then parentheses XYZ coordinates and then the weight of it. And then I would have to put multiple XYZ coordinates to make this tank, like a real tank. It's a tedious process going through like the offsets of like the mechanical drawings and verifying with that, and then to make sure that it looks good in 3D. So the learning curve. And then when I was talking about like the weight of the flask, basically the same thing. You just input quotation marks, flask, weight, and you put the center of gravity for each of these weights. So basically it's just like a placeholder, and then you put the center of gravity in relation to the ship, and then you put the weight, and then you put all these center of gravities for each component throughout the ship, and then it models the worst case yield, trim, if it's shifting starboard, port side, is it going to capsize, it spits out all of that.
So in your Excel spreadsheet, you're going to have all these different values, and they represent like maybe specific locations in space or specific weights of the components. And then your Matlab program will reference those numbers and say, okay, these numbers mean that this center of gravity is here. And then it takes those and puts them into the GHS program so that that knows, based on all these numbers we got from the spreadsheets, this is where
the center of gravity is.
Yeah, this specific component is, and this is how far it is from like the center of gravity of the entire ship, and it's able to model it that way.
Yeah, because obviously if you have too much weight on the port or starboard side, it's going to start leading towards that way. Plus you take into factor like the wind, the wave, the worst case scenario is that you don't want that thing to capsize or to tip over, and then it's going to be a big mess.
Now, do you have to make new spreadsheets and new Matlab functions for each project, or do you typically carry them over?
It really depends. Not every single project is the same. There's certain functions that are just pretty common. It really depends, because most of the time the two projects are ever similar. There could be some similar characteristics, like it could be a barge, it could be like a ship or a yacht. Everything's always different modeling. The commands are typically the same, just like the inputs are different. Center of gravities are always different weights, different tanks, different balancing tanks, how many tanks are there. The number of tanks always changes.
Do you ever start a project from complete scratch or no?
Yeah, so this LNG project was actually from almost complete scratch, just getting the concept idea of what the client wants. It all starts with a hand drawing of what they want, and then just do a quick sketch on AutoCAD of the basic dimensions of like the length, the width, and all that, and then going back to figure out exactly what size flask and these cells are going to be located on the ship. So that's how we process it through.
Gotcha. And then once you have that preliminary sketch, and you said you use AutoCAD for that, right?
Yeah, AutoCAD, yep.
Gotcha. Once you have that preliminary sketch, do you then like start going into Excel workbooks and Matlab to be like, now we need to fine tune exact numbers for this project so that we can use the GHS to start modeling? Yeah.
So basically another spreadsheet that has like the midship section. So basically when you slice the ship in half, you see where every single component, where all the steel is at. So that'd be the first step, is basically model the ship, knowing exactly where all the structures would be, all the beams throughout the ship. As you can see, the ship's pretty intricate. All the structure of the beam. But luckily, there's a guide. We're certifying this barge to ABS rules. So ABS did come up with their certifications for barges. And luckily, I also worked for them. So I'm pretty familiar with going through their steps to make sure that we comply with them so that they could certify our design before production.
So now, once this client emailed you and requested some changes to the flasks and stuff, did you just go in Excel and change some numbers around?
Yeah, go in Excel, but then also discussing this with my senior designer, who's also helping with the restructuring of the flask container.
What did you guys come up with? Did you say like, okay, we can do this, we can make these changes?
This is not a quick turnaround. It's always going to be punching in numbers. Once we have Excel filled out, we would have to put on the GSS program. And if we start seeing that the weight's not going to hold, then we, again, have to modify this or go back to the client to see if this is the exact number they want, or tell them our findings. Because if we start modeling it and our model is not going to work, it's going to capsize, then we have to stop, come to an agreement of, okay, where could we go from here?
In this situation, did all the numbers work out and you were able to make the changes?
We made the changes, but then we're still punching in through the numbers, so we haven't come to a full conclusion yet. I would have to keep working on this and then also discuss this with the DO, because we haven't come up with a conclusion that's confident that increasing this LNG would work.
So you're still waiting on results?
Yeah, sometimes you need a quick meeting with the client, and sometimes they're busy, or it's hard to get their engineers on the phone at the same time when we're free. So it's always a lot of coordination.
Once you guys started making the changes, and did you do anything else after that?
No, so basically, it's almost an all-day trial run, trying to work through the software, updating the spreadsheet and modifications of the cell. That's basically pretty full work day, a lot of trial and error. This particular day, that was mainly that, and then just trying to come up with a good solution for our client.
So you were just like messing around with like all the numbers and making the changes?
Yeah, basically just modifying, either increasing the height or the width of the flask, and also manipulating the weight of the steel and the weight of the LNG.
Did you guys come to a conclusion about increasing the LNG capacity, and like were the changes okay to make?
Yeah, we were able to model the new ship with the added weight of the LNG and also added the weight of the steel to make sure that the ship will be balanced with the length, the width, the depth of the ship that the client wants. So we were able to all come to agreement and be able to satisfy the client's request to increase the load for the LNG. So I was able to run my program and also show the president of the company my spreadsheet so that we're all in agreement for the next meeting. We'll fully present our data findings and proceed with our design.
Do you think there was a disadvantage having a mechanical engineering degree in this industry, or like would it have been better for you to get a degree in marine engineering or naval architecture or something like that?
I would say, yeah, I'm at a slight disadvantage because if I'm dealing in the marine shipping industry, it's more beneficial if I pursue my career going to a maritime school, going out to sea, sailing, or a naval architecture degree, because graduates who graduated with those degrees from a maritime school, they're more accustomed to the GHS program, which I currently use now, but I didn't use it in college at all. I never even heard of it until I started working with ships, and also like the 3D modeling software Rhino. I know that they use that a lot in college as well, and I never had exposure to that. So I think I'm at a slight disadvantage because not knowing like the shipping, because like mechanical engineering is pretty widespread. It wasn't geared towards like ships or anything. I learned about vibration, statics, dynamics, physics, pretty more general. So I feel like naval architecture or marine engineering is more specific for this industry. So I'm at a slight disadvantage.
Are you ever involved in determining the type of specific steel or materials that you use in these ship designs? Or is that something that's typically standard and it doesn't really change?
Well, typically in like the marine, pretty standard 316 steel. Mainly it's pretty common steel all the way across the board with the shipping industry. So there's not really too many deviations of it.